Welcome to Mastering Fundraising, a podcast for nonprofit leaders of all titles and all experience levels. Mastering Fundraising endeavors to cover the most important fundraising topics with the goal of helping the audience reach their full potential as fundraisers. This podcast will share stories, tips, and guidance on the most important elements of fundraising. If you want to earn an advanced degree in fundraising, this is the podcast for you. Mastering Fundraising is a collaboration between Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership and the 5-Tool Fundraiser, two leaders in providing relevant and expert content to fundraisers and nonprofit leaders. Without further delay, let's jump into the current episode. Please join me in welcoming your host for today, Chris Looney.
Welcome to Mastering Fundraising, a show that interviews the world's top fundraisers to explore the most important fundraising topics. The goal is to help our audience achieve their full potential as fundraising professionals. My name is Chris Looney, and I have the great privilege to be your host for this deep dive into fundraising. And on today's episode, we are joined by Brian Hervey, Vice Chancellor for University Advancement and Alumni Relations at the University of California, Irvine. Brian is the university's chief fundraiser and a nationally recognized leader in philanthropy. Under his leadership, UC Irvine launched and successfully completed an historic $2 billion capital campaign, the largest in the university's history, and was a transformative effort that has reshaped the campus and its impact on the region. Brian has decades of experience building philanthropic partnerships, leading high-performing advancement teams, and thinking strategically about how fundraising drives institutional vision. We're excited to dig into what it takes to lead a campaign of this enormous scale, the challenges and opportunities along the way, and what nonprofit leaders everywhere can learn from UC Irvine's success. So, Brian, thanks for joining us. We're certainly glad to have you with us.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, and thank you for that humbling and somewhat embarrassing introduction. But I hope that we can share some things to the listeners today that hopefully will, sort of guide them in their paths as well in terms of this wonderful career that we were all in.
That's awesome. Well, I know it's going to be helpful, and it's going to be exciting for me to hear a little bit more about the campaign, because I know from my work in campaigns that they're all so unique and exciting and have thrilling climaxes and peaks and valleys and everything in between. So I'm excited to dig in, and I know the audience is going to enjoy it as well. But before we get to the campaign, let's start with what is also very exciting for a lot of the audience is to hear about a leader's journey to the sort of heights of leadership that they've achieved. And I'd love to know a little bit about how you became the leader you are today.
Well, thank you. No, I appreciate that. And, it's interesting. I think that you probably hear this a lot, and I've heard it from so many leaders in our industry that they sort of got into this business sort of in a circuitous way. They didn't sort of start out with the idea. Some of us were born into fundraising royalty families like the Looney family, but that gave you a great background and experience as to what this job is. I sort of got into it. October 29th, 1997. So why would I have that number memorized?
Yeah.
That was the birth of my son.
Okay.
And so he was born and he was premature. It's a good news story. This isn't
yeah, right. Thank you.
So I'll just preface with that. But he was born and again, about almost 6 weeks premature. And so he ended up in a neonatal intensive care unit. And so I was, in that time, I was a financial advisor for Morgan Stanley. And so I wasn't even thinking about fundraising, never even thought about it as a career choice, but I loved advising people and working on these financial plans. And so he ends up in the hospital for, again, about a month. And in my little community, I was living in College Station, Texas.
Yeah.
And so I'd graduated from Texas A&M and gone through a number of careers, things I wanted to do. I was a police officer. I was an insurance agent. I was, a restaurant manager. I worked for a car lot, was car sales, and then ended up in financial advising and then done some other things on top of that. So just in my first few years out of school, I tried lots of things that I was interested in. Most people sort of fixate on the police officer part, as that's being an interesting thing to do for a little while. But So I ended up in financial services, and um, and Brandon ends up in this hospital, and we have to fly him there because the small town, College Station is not a terribly small town. About with Brian, it's about 120,000 people roughly at that time.
Okay.
And so two main hospitals, but none of the hospitals had the facilities to take care of a sick baby.
Gotcha.
So
Yes.
you've got to call in the helicopter and the teams and all of that. And so you sort of as new parents are going through that drama of, your baby is getting, all these people crowding around, working on him, trying to make sure he's okay. And then all of a sudden he gets flown off, and we've got to go to another community to where there is the proper medical care. So we went through that, and as I went through that experience, I'm kind of a detail guy, as many of us are. So I was watching all the things that are happening around the hospital, and you're looking at the facility, and you're looking at the age of the equipment, and you're looking at the doctors and the nurses and the other healthcare providers in terms
Sure.
of what are they doing and what is their resources that they have available to take care of all of these very small babies. Once I got to see this neonatal intensive care unit, so as we're watching all of this, um, and I was just thinking about it and thinking, there's got to be something. They're doing the best that they can with what they have, but they need more, and the facility was old. It had been built many years before. And um, so I got through the experience, and I'm very happy to say Brandon did great. We got to take him home, and he's been happy and healthy and now 27 years old. It's hard to believe that, but,
That's great.
really doing well. And so, the kind of the weird part of that story is I ended up as the vice president of development and communications for that hospital system. So eventually it all sort of came full circle. But the quicker, it's already a long story, but the quicker version of how that happened is, so I get home, he's okay. And so I start doing research into how do we have a NICU in our community so that no other parents have to go through this issue. And
Amazing.
so the organization who primarily did that kind of work is the March of Dimes. So I contacted the March of Dimes. I said, "What can I do to help?" They do it mostly community-based fundraising, kind of grassroots fundraising. So I ran a couple of fundraisers for them, raised some money, and then they asked me to join their board as the vice president for fundraising. So I did that just as a volunteer. And then my church asked me they were going to build a new building. And so they asked me to be the campaign director for that. So this is all while I'm a financial planner during the day, and I was
Yeah.
fundraising it for these worthy organizations. And so it was wonderful. And so in the course of this is probably a question you might even be asking me later, but in the course of doing the church fundraising, I met a member of the church who was the new director of planned giving for Texas A&M. And I didn't know that. He didn't know what I did. And so we sat down and had lunch one day. And by the end of that lunch, it was Glenn Pittsford. And so by the end of that lunch, Glenn said, "You know what? You're going to come work for us. And so you're going to, come to the A&M Foundation, take a look at what we do, and we think you might be the right kind of person to come in." And that was for Texas A&M's first $1 billion campaign.
Oh my gosh.
So I was hired. I made the switch. I left financial planning and moved over to planned giving
Right.
for this $1 billion campaign, and we raised about 1.4 billion for that campaign. So that started in about 2000
And was
for
this person
Texas A&M.
ultimately your boss?
He was, and also probably my greatest mentor in this business. He
Oh,
was
good story.
absolutely fantastic. And so, Glenn really showed me I wasn't a fundraiser by career, certainly. And so he really showed me the ropes, got me the training I needed in terms of plan giving, both for him and from him, and from a lot of our great vendors that do the plan giving training.
Sure.
Just really had an amazing experience. And I got to move up during that campaign. So I was plan giving officer, then director of development for student affairs, and then director of development for the Corps of Cadets at A&M, and then ultimately kind of moved into healthcare side. I was the chief fundraiser for the School of Medicine there at A&M. So I had these wonderful opportunities there to really grow and have some great mentors. Robert Gates, who was formerly the CIA
Sure.
director and became president of Texas A&M. He was the president while I was there, which gave me another great mentor, great somebody to watch who was just an incredible leader. And so I got to work for him. And then that's when it sort of came full circle for me as we finished the campaign and I finished building some buildings for the medical school, for the A&M system, slightly different job. I was called by the healthcare system where my son was born, Scott and White. And so Scott and White was looking for a campaign director to expand their healthcare system. So I was hired. And so I got to go in as campaign director for the hospital where my son was and really make an impact there. So I was there for almost 7 years in their expansion. So I got to build greenfield hospitals. I got to take over hospitals and
Yeah.
raise endowments. We got to build, as a matter of fact, a new NICU and a new children's
I was
hospital
just gonna ask.
while I was there. So it was really, an incredibly rewarding time in my career to be able to do that and to have that impact to an institution I really liked, but also wanted to see grow. And so we grew to 14 hospitals while I was there and then merged with Baylor. And so I was part of that merger team, and we got to merge with Baylor Health out of Dallas
Yep.
and became a 43 hospital system. So a
Massive.
massive organization. And so I started there as campaign director and left as the vice president for development and communications. And so at that time, I was offered the opportunity here at UC Irvine, first really to look at their healthcare expansion, which we can talk a little bit about in terms of the campaign. But they were looking to really expand their healthcare footprint here. And so I came out to California to Irvine and I've been out here now 10 years. It's hard to believe, but was able to really finish their last campaign, their billion-dollar campaign, and then launch the current campaign that is completing in just 2 weeks. We are well over goal, the $2 billion campaign, Brilliant Future
Wow.
campaign for UC Irvine. So I've been very, very blessed in terms of a career.
Yeah, well, the communities that you've worked in have been blessed to have you as such a capable fundraiser and leader, and to help them accomplish all of these amazing goals. So it's a two-way street, but I love that story and the fact that you could build that NICU that Brandon probably would have used back 27 years ago is really special. Right. So that's great. And I know you came out here 10 years ago or whatever it was, and you probably didn't love the prices of homes, but I'm sure you've grown to love the weather. So you do some trade-offs, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great place to be.
Yeah, it is. That's for sure. So when we think about different roles that you've had in your career. I used to ask this question, what was your favorite job, right? And inevitably, everyone would say, well, the job I'm in is my favorite job, and so I'm kind of pivoted to sort of open it up and say, well, within those jobs or your favorite job within any of the jobs, what's the favorite role that you've had? What brings you the greatest satisfaction of the work that you do? What is that specific kind of role?
You know what? So when I first came to UC Irvine, the job was sort of vice chancellor for advancement, which common job. I think we're all pretty familiar with what that usually is and how that works out. And so, so really all I had was supervising the development officers and sort of thinking about the next campaign. The Alumni Association and the foundation were separate jobs, believe it or not. So, and so when we started to really analyze the success of doing a major comprehensive campaign, those are two very necessary pieces to have coordinated. So we took on those roles as well. They moved the Alumni Association over to my organization, and I also became the president of the UC Irvine Foundation, which was previously the chancellor. It was kind of an interesting structure, but
Yeah.
before me, the chancellor was the president of the foundation and chancellor. So now
Okay.
it's vice chancellor and president in with my role. So, as I think about what has been most rewarding in this current position, I think being that president of the foundation role has been my favorite role, really because I get to work hand in hand with the trustees every day. We've been
Mm,
able to guide the board. We've grown the board from about 35 members to now 65, which sounds, some people may think, why in the world would you grow your board? But we had a lot to do. We have 16 different schools on the campus. We
right.
now have 6 hospitals. We have, all these things going on. And so we needed a much bigger board to have representation of all of these different areas of the campus. And plus, we really wanted to make sure we had a board that was reflective of our community.
Mhm.
And as you know, Orange County is a very diverse community. Our campus is a very diverse community in itself.
That's right.
And so, adding all those board members to me has been, and working with all of those members has been the most rewarding part of this career. But it sort of is, as you can imagine, in our role, the campaign is the biggest success of that. That's the tangible sign that we must be doing something right.
Yeah, that's right. It's easy to point to that and say, see, that's what success looks like. But as you point out in fundraising, especially working with the donors, working with them as volunteers as well as a really special privilege that that not enough people get to have. And I'm glad you brought that to our attention and pointed that out. Well, in all of these different leadership roles, you've probably developed some philosophy for leadership, or you at least have identified some ingredients that you feel are the most important or valuable to successful leadership in the nonprofit space. And I'd love it if you could share what that might be or what those might be.
Absolutely. So as I think about my journey, it's always been about building a great team around you, and not being afraid for somebody to be better at something than I am, to make sure that I get the best people in every role. And so I'm very happy, especially here at UC Irvine, where I've had a pretty consistent leadership team over time. And so that I feel is super important. And we know that in this industry, the turnover rates are pretty high, for a lot of reasons, right? And not the least of which is just there's lots of opportunities out there. We're very needed, and there's not enough of us out there doing this work. And so it's hard to keep people.
Yeah.
And if being at a public university, that's been really a main goal for me, is to make sure that even though I can't necessarily compensate people at the highest level, but it's fair and it's good benefits. I think it's creating the right work environment where people can be successful, that they're not, managed so much by, say, the metrics or policies and procedures that people can't be successful. So that is really, as I've looked at the system we have set up here, that was the goal, is to look at, I came in and did an evaluation of the procedures, policies, the database, how the database was managed, how are we managing prospects. And we really loosened, believe it or not, a lot of that. And so we looked at, how we could, we did change the database over. I won't say who it was before, just not to say, but we went to Salesforce. And so I did that pretty early in the campaign, with a very tight timetable. I did a 24-month conversion from the previous database and moved the entire campus to Salesforce during that time. And as a matter of fact, we're looking at doing it again as I finish the campaign. I think the next iteration of that will be Education Cloud from Salesforce. And so
Interesting.
that brings in an entirely new set of tools. So I love the technology,
Yeah.
but I don't want the technology to run the lives of our team.
Yeah.
We need to use it as a help. And so we've made pretty big investments. But I think that, from a management perspective, I want to create the best systems possible, to provide as much efficiency and return on investment as we can, but then let the gift officers use these tools in a way that makes them successful.
Right.
And so how do we allow everyone to have the ability to somewhat self-determine how they can be most successful in doing this work? And ultimately that leads to, I think, a team that stays in place, that isn't looking to move just for a few dollars more or whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
um, but actually is dedicated to the mission and feel like they can be most successful and learn here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that opportunity to be a part of a strong team that's well led, that's doing great work, where the impact is critically important, and where the culture is strong and positive, and there's an opportunity for growth and flexibility and some autonomy as well, all factors into sort of a successful environment. And kudos to you for creating one where people stay, people thrive, people grow, and are able to do extraordinary things. Um, so now that we've kind of talked a little bit about the leadership journey, we've got some context about you as a leader and where you come from and how you approach the work. I'm excited to dig into capital campaigns, or comprehensive campaigns in this particular case, and kind of pull back the curtain a little bit to kind of know what goes into some of these very significant, sizable, and complex initiatives, because they're not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. So, what I would like to know a little bit, though, as we kind of think about UCI and what makes it unique, because I think that's a part of the story, is a little bit of a background on UC Irvine. And I'd love to know what sort of makes the university and its mission distinctive in the higher education landscape.
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. Just as a little bit of background, the UC system is a 10 campus system, and then several national labs. Five of those campus have has some level of academic health center attached to it. So it's a big system. Many billions per campus in terms of budget. Our campus is about a $6 billion operation.
Okay.
Um, the mission of the University of California system uh, certainly has a lot to do with providing the highest level of research of a research campus to serve the state of California. And so about 80% of all the students on each of the 10 campuses are California residents. The other 20% roughly is made up of international students and out-of-state students. So there's a very strong California-based mission around the UC system.
Right.
And so it creates so many opportunities when we think about development and fundraising around how well the UC system does around that mission. And I would say, based on the rankings, if you look at any different metrics, if you look at sort of top 10 schools, top 10 public universities, best value schools, any number of these types of rankings, the number of underserved students that are served by the University of California system, the UC system tends to be among the top in the nation. I would say in the world in terms of serving populations and giving access to high level education than really any other system in the world. So I think we've got a great story to sell and to tell as we go out into the philanthropic world, not just in California, but we raise money all over the world for our great programs. And a lot of it is based on research, wonderful research programs for us. Health is a really big part of our operation,
Right.
and our health advancement team. But it's just a great story. I mean, today, just this morning, I was at a symposium. We have three Nobel laureates that are attending this meeting on vision research, and they are moving very fast to cure a type of hereditary blindness. And so to be able to be in that room and to have donors there to see the incredible work that's being happening, not just on our campus, but as we convene other researchers from around the world to tackle some of the grandest challenges.
Yeah, amazing. And UC Irvine is amazing because its size, significance, impact kind of is suggestive of a university or an institution that's been around a long time, 100 years plus. But it's relatively young in terms of an institution, maybe what, 55, 60 years, so something around the
That's exactly right. So this is our 60th anniversary year as a
60th.
campus. And so
Okay.
I came in the 50th anniversary celebration. That was sort of notable. President Obama spoke at the 50th commencement of UC Irvine, but our 50-year anniversary.
Yeah.
But yes, we are 60 years old. So, I kind of often tell that story. We're sort of punching above our weight a bit. The school has moved forward very quickly in the rankings and certainly in the research side. And I think that's partially because of the power of the University of California system. Having that name is really important.
Yeah, agreed. And being successful for those 60 years doesn't hurt as well in terms of graduates and the health outcomes, all of that. So that's important, but still doesn't make raising $2 billion easy or reasonable or feasible. So I'd love to know how the idea for that $2 billion campaign first came about, and what were the key goals that kind of guided it back in those planning days.
So, there's all those rules of thumb that we all love to hang on to as fundraisers. So, you double the last campaign. That's one that very often people think about.
Yeah.
You divide the campaign into thirds, and a third is sort of program support, a third is endowment building, and then a third might be current use sorts of things, and capital, for instance. And so that was a little bit of it. So we got here and the previous campaign was just ending, so I kind of finished the last one. They had done $1 billion campaign, but the numbers were sort of trailing a bit. So they sort of had we see lots of models of campaigns, right? We see some that are just every year up. We see some that have a plateau, and then they kind of go up and down during the campaign period. And then this one sort of their first campaign kind of went up and then sort of trailed off. Something happened to the interest, and just lots of things happening in the world at that time, of course, too. And so it sort of trailed off. And so we, believe it or not, launched this campaign. I got here, we did the analysis of what needed to be done, where the opportunities were. And so we launched a dual goal campaign because as we looked at the numbers, 2 billion was a big number. And a lot of people at that time said, you're crazy. How are you going to pull out of the sort of the drop and
Donor
yet
fee.
raise double the money? Exactly. And so, we really saw that in that 60 years of history, 50 years at that point, we hadn't really engaged alumni in the appropriate way. So we saw the alumni giving numbers as we did the analysis just wasn't where I would have expected it to be. So we decided we were going to launch a dual goal. We were going to launch the $2 billion. I knew I could double the fundraising with a great team. And I knew we had the things to raise money for. It was clear to me that this was a place where really exciting things were happening that would really capture that interest of so many donors and philanthropists. And so, but we had that issue of engagement. And so we set the two goals equally, the $2 billion goal, and to engage what at that time was about half of our alumni, 75,000 alumni in a meaningful way.
Okay.
And that engagement could include attending homecoming, joining an advisory board for a school or program. Giving, of course, was a key one there. But it could be any of those. And so it didn't have to be giving. It could just be getting back in touch with your school and finding out what was happening at UC Irvine. So we set that. So we went over that goal as well by quite a bit. And so as we sort of looked at what that number should be, you know, very often you might do a feasibility study and try to figure out, interview your major donors to see what the appetite was.
Right.
We launched the Brilliant Future 1 month after completing the previous campaign and just went with the number.
Yeah.
We just went with the chancellor and several of the university leadership sat down and said, we can do this. And
Yeah.
I was confident we could do it.
Brian,
And so
you got
we
this.
didn't have a quiet phase. We just went straight into it.
And did you have the name Brilliant Futures already determined at that moment, or was that something you constructed as you got into the sort of planning, building the airplane while you fly it to kind of campaign work?
So it did come later. So we just went ahead and launched in, and I didn't do campaign counsel for this. I tend not to do that on my campaigns. I tend to hire consultants that I really believe are the best in their field for specific things that they're best at.
Great.
So rather than having a big umbrella contract, I have separate contracts for things. And so we got a great marketing firm on board that helped us sort of think about the brilliant future. Brilliant is a common theme in the University of California system. You see it all the time. The motto of the University of California system is Fiat Lux, let there be light. So almost everything you see in terms of campaign themes tends to be around that light idea.
Wow.
And so it's just sort of fit. that would be a great name, and then we came up with a sort of we call it the Surge. It's sort of a interesting logo that was something we could repeat on every piece of marketing material, every PowerPoint slide that any professor used. It would have a little color swirl in the corner, and people got to know that that's the campaign.
Yeah.
That's got something to do with the campaign. So it did launch later, and we actually launched the campaign October of 2019, right before something else happened. As we got into COVID, just a few months later. So we publicly launched all this with these big plans of we're going to go on a road show and we're going to do regional events and COVID right in the first 6 months of the campaign.
First.
So it was an interesting campaign, but we were sort of building it as we went, and we just stuck to. Of course, we didn't know COVID was coming, but we sort of stuck to that timeline. And believe it or not, at that time, another rule of thumb in our business, these rule of thumbs are good guides, but you can't follow them too religiously. Every institution is different. So
Yeah.
we weren't really even we launched publicly at about 30%. We'd seen big increases. We doubled fundraising first year, doubled it again second year. So we were on the right trajectory, but not at a $2 billion trajectory quite yet. But we launched. We knew we could do it, and we would stay on that glide path up. And so it was a little bit of a back-end loaded campaign. We
Yeah.
raised a lot more the last few years.
Yeah. Well, and being a part of the UC system, you had UCLA to look at, maybe some of the other campuses as well. I think I recall one of their campaigns was a $4 billion effort, and they had
Yes.
launched publicly at 1.2 billion, which I think a lot of people thought, oh, I thought you were supposed to publicly launch after 50% or 70% or 80%. And I used to say to people, well, there are different rules with comprehensive campaigns. It's sort of announcement comes when you know that your goal is achievable, whether that's at 10%, 20%, or whatever it is. So I'm sure you had some great confidence that you were on the right track and that you were going to get to that $2 billion number by that time.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. What were the big sort of infrastructure needs that you had to be focused on to make sure that $2 billion was achievable?
So I mentioned one of them already. I was really looking at the database. So when I came in and uh, we really did spend some time in a deep dive on all of the databases, and it was a very typical story that you've heard many times probably, which is there were databases all over the place. So, different schools would have a database, and maybe it was an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe it was a more professional sort of donor database or contact manager, but there was just data everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it was a matter of uh, trying to figure out where all that information was and bring it together. So that was kind of the first big challenge and system to create was converting to a complete campus-wide database where we compiled all of this information. And then it was really about the supervision. I mentioned the bringing together of the Alumni Association and the foundation and advancement all as a single team. So that was a really important step, I think, in being able to really help guide the message across the campus of what we were and keep us all coordinated. And I think the third piece was sort of the piece. So I got here. It was a decentralized campus. It is now a centralized campus from a reporting structure.
Okay.
So in that decentralized model, we found that there were gift officers in units who were compensated at a certain level with a set of goals that were not consistent across the schools. And so what we would see when you have that, one of the effects of that is that people jump from school to school because they could get paid more, maybe just across the hall. And that of course is not good for the organization. You want to reward your best people, but you want them to move up, working with many of those really key relationships that they've established over time. So we changed that. So we created a much more centralized model, standardized job descriptions, standardized uh, metrics for each sort of title level.
Mhm.
And so the way I looked at it is we don't want to be so tied to you can have this many executive directors, and each executive director needs to have a senior director, a director. You've got to just move, up and down, up the chain to get to that next level. If you're a great performer and your metrics are that level that we consider to be an executive director, you can be an executive director. We promote you. So we really looked at that so that we could create a system that was fair across the campus, taking into account, of course, some schools are different and everything's relative, right? So when we talk about a $2 billion campaign for UC Irvine, those same steps might be a $100 million campaign at another university. You've got to do the same things. It's all relative, and you're always building. That's the most important thing is that you're building the system that is scalable and will keep moving your institution up.
Yeah.
And so that was really the challenge is to and that took a few years. That was not an easy thing or an overnight thing to do was to change, your whole human resources structure. But now we're centralized.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about systems and structure and process, because I think it's so easy for people to focus on, we needed to get this big gift, and then we needed to get that big gift, or we needed to recruit this chair, and a campaign of this size, this length, this magnitude, um, where you've already sort of experienced a significant amount of annual fundraising and big gifts. You need to really enhance the capacity through making sure your systems are connected and your systems are working properly, that information flows, that there is not breakdowns that are major hindrances in the ways that you communicate, that the way that you manage, all of those things. So that attention to detail is so important, and helpful, as well. One of the things that has fascinated me is, like, let's say you go from $1 billion campaign to a $2 billion campaign. It sounds like you wanted to engage more donors, the number of donors you wanted to increase, especially from your alumni base. But did you just like double the size of every gift on your gift table from one campaign to another? How did you think about the kinds of gifts that you would need, especially at some of the more significant levels, to be successful?
So what I found here is that there was a major reliance, and this is true really across, I've seen it in most of the UC schools, actually, as I talk to my colleagues. Uh, we get pretty big transformational gifts. Like they're sort of, when I was at Texas A&M and we did the $1 billion campaign, the largest gift in that campaign was 32 million. What we did lots and lots of were $1 million gifts.
Yeah.
And we sort of almost specialized. We're doing lots and lots of them, primarily from alumni.
Mhm.
Here, alumni was a very, very small proportion of the giving. And what we were seeing was very large opportunities for these transformational gifts. In this campaign, we had a 200, a 100, a lot of 50 million, 75 million sorts of gifts. And so that was primarily done sort of out of the kind of the administration team, my team, working on the principal gifts. And then really focusing on the schools around engagement and those gifts from, say, the 50,000 to 5 million sorts of range in the schools. But we have a particular issue that I'm still trying to solve here, which is I would call it the missing middle issue. And so maybe
Okay.
some of the listeners have had this issue as well. So we
Yeah.
have a very strong grassroots fundraising effort, lots of checks coming in from alums and others in the community. The $1 to several $1,000 checks that kind of come in.
Right.
We do well in that area. And then we do really well in the big principal gift kind of area. And where we have a gap is sort of that range I just referenced, which was sort of the entry level major gifts to, say, $1 million gift. We don't see that as much. And so that's what we're now trying to really think about for the future and build out. Now, what that does allow when you have that, it's not, it's a problem you might like to have, actually, is the fact that you're getting these really large, impactful gifts. But it makes it awfully hard to predict and build a system where, one of our goals was to create a system where we could reliably depend on a
Right.
certain amount of fundraising and then incrementally build that over time. Uh, we kind of did that almost by accident. So we did have that growth over time because we were building more of the annual fund in some of those levels, but we still hadn't reached the what I would call the major gift giving alum. We're still not sort of seeing the case yet to give, and we're of course now working on that with our engagement efforts. You got to engage before you ask, and so that is certainly an important part of what we do moving forward. But we're still missing that. As I look at the numbers, like I see the gaps there. So we've been very, very fortunate to have, these wonderful major transformative gifts, but they've been primarily from the community. And that's
Right.
what makes Orange County and Southern California very unique to other states, other regions, is there's a lot of money in those hills right behind me.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of people that are so passionate about the causes that they care about, and we can offer them an opportunity to invest in that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true, and I love what you sort of admitted to, which is that missing middle, which is very typical, very common, I think, in a lot of organizations, maybe especially in California, but I think throughout the country. And it seems to me that your work in developing the engagement around your alumni, especially even just at some of the lower levels, lower tier levels, over time will allow you to build the steps that seem to be missing in that pyramid up to the top. And
Yes.
that's my hope at least, because I think so many organizations need to figure out how to create the pathway through the middle.
That's right.
Yeah. One of the questions that seems very difficult in these kinds of campaigns is alignment, is really creating alignment with the university in this case, or the organization's broader strategic vision, the academic priorities, the community impact requirement that you should have, student success, patient outcomes, all of these disparate needs that you need to accommodate in the campaign. How do you think about coalescing all of these things together?
So it's obviously it's extremely important. And I had mentioned earlier, I've had a pretty blessed career of and a lot of our success, I think, on all of our parts is timing sometimes. So my timing was that I came in 2015 at the same time the campus was completing a strategic plan.
Okay.
And in this strategic plan involved everyone from administration to faculty to staff to students. So it was a very comprehensive 10-year plan
Mhm.
of what the campus wanted to accomplish. So I get handed this pretty soon after I'm here. I get here during the tail end of those discussions. So I had my roadmap. It was
Yep.
basically all done and handed to me. I just needed to create a case out of those areas. We even did a competition during that process, towards the end of the process, where we offered students, staff, and faculty the opportunity to pitch ideas, to come up with the things that they wanted to, as a sort of a contest, and the winner would end up in the case statement. And so, but it gave us such rich information of things we would never knew were happening on the campus, hearing about student groups and things that they were doing to reach out into the community that we would have never known. So between those two projects, the campus led strategic plan and then this competition where we went out to find even more great ideas, we had a wealth of information. And so based on that, we could build out a case statement that was quite comprehensive. And I know what many of us try to do, and we did this, is you come up with a relatively small number of sort of themes for your campaign that any idea, anything that a donor can imagine that they would like to support or passionate about somehow fit within those pillars. And so we created the four pillars for the campaign based on that strategic plan, and every gift fits within those pillars.
That's right. The menu is broad. It's
It
large enough
is.
that you can find something for everyone, right?
That's
And
right.
and have the capacity to create um, gifts that are meaningful for you and that will impact positively the university as well. Um, I joked earlier about donor fatigue, and I'm sure there were not a few people who thought everyone was crazy for contemplating the idea of completing $1 billion campaign and going into a $2 billion campaign, given the fact that so many of those donors from the first campaign would be required to give again. Um, and so I was wanting to ask the question about how you steward your donors from one campaign to the next, knowing that or preparing them for the next gift. I mean, how did you have to take any special steps with them? Uh, was it a strategy that went into that kind of discussion with those donors? What did that look like, especially for the ones at the highest?
So yeah, I think that was certainly a big consideration because I went and during those first few months interviewed a lot of the trustees. You might say I mentioned I didn't do an official feasibility study, but I had a lot of conversations with the people that I believed would be the
Amen.
leaders in the next campaign. And I saw a definite interest in looking at what had been done over the last few years, looking at the things that were happening within our community. There was an absolute interest in continuing to give and continuing to support and to move that up. And so, as I mentioned, the numbers had dropped a little bit, not significantly, but they were, there was, an opportunity. The campaign wasn't sort of finishing on an upswing, the previous campaign. So there was also that I hate to say that helped, but it kind of did. That the numbers had trailed off a little bit, so there was a need to create excitement,
Yeah.
which a campaign can do. As we know, it's a tool, and
Mhm.
so goal number one, campaign or not, was to increase fundraising and to create the systems that would allow us to increase the support to the campus. Campaign, of course, is a perfect tool to do that. So, given that we could see the opportunity, there was no reason to wait, and so we just launched into it. So I wouldn't say it was anything out of the ordinary from what we do as leaders in this industry, but that analysis showed me, oh, we can go ahead now. We can go ahead and start.
Yeah, that's so important. So you were able to assess through those conversations that the appetite was there, the needs were there, the level of excitement for some of these new priorities was there. That's perfect. I love that. We've talked about the team and the great team that you have. I'm sure they were exceptionally strong in their roles and brought exactly what you needed to be able to deliver $2 billion. But what about the other players in this? For example, you have the chancellor, you have faculty, you have deans, you have physicians, you have all of these individuals that could play a very significant role. How did you engage them? How did you maximize their capacity to support this campaign effort?
So I was again blessed to have a chancellor who was very strong in development. Had been a dean at USC, came here as provost, and then moved into the chancellor role just a little bit less than a year before I was hired. And so he was a wonderful closer, but also just a great communicator and could really appeal to very broad audiences about where the campus was going. So
Right.
I think that's always extremely important. So again, another thing that was just perfect timing is to come in as he is ascending as the chancellor and designing what he was going to accomplish during his terms.
Yeah.
And so that really helped. Um, one of the key areas for me, and I think for all of us, if you have it, is healthcare. That's a very rich area of fundraising and need. And so we launched a Grateful Patient program almost immediately after arrival.
Okay.
And so by the way we did it is very much a provider-based program. So what we do is we identified about 100 physicians at UCI Health who both had the interest in being part of development and advancement, but also had the right patient basis. So you could pick certain specialties where our research would show there was a lot of potential donors.
Mhm.
And so we started with that group of 100 and expanded it over time. But we then assigned gift officers to each of those physicians. We scheduled a cadence of how they would meet, usually once a month. And so we were able to, this is kind of unique to our system. I know some systems don't allow this, but we were able to set up the proper controls and HIPAA compliance so that we could get a daily download of patient data. So all very protected, following all the rules.
Of course.
But it gave us, we knew, and I know now, every morning who has gone through UCI Health the previous day. And we have a pretty sophisticated system set up to be able to rate, screen, determine if they're a first-time patient or they're a returning patient, current donor, non-donor, all of those things. And so we have about a 60-day process. And we set this up almost from day one of coming here, where we get that data, we compile it, we check with the physician, we identify who we want to contact from that group. We don't round, we don't do anything with it for 30 days.
Mhm.
The 30-day to 60-day is when we actually contact those patients.
Okay.
But before we do that, these gift officers talk to the physician. And so we know they're a good prospect. The physician says, oh, yes, that's somebody that I'd like to talk to. And then we have a process by which we send out an email and a letter signed by both the physician and the gift officer, inviting that patient, that grateful patient, to have a conversation with us.
Yeah.
So that's how we were able to bring the medical side on board. On the campus side, at least for me, it's been much more about engaging the deans. So we, under Chancellor Gilman, when he was Provost Gilman, he put into every job description for new deans that 50% of their time was to be spent on external relations activities.
Wonderful.
That's a pretty unheard of number, at least from what I've seen.
Right. Right.
But what it did, though, is every dean, then every candidate that we've interviewed over the years, and every dean currently in that position, it's there. It's part of their job, and they understand it, and they take the job understanding that advancement and engagement piece is a very important piece to the campus and in their role as dean. So I work a little closer with the dean sometimes than I do with the gift officers in the school. I meet with all of them, but I meet with the gift officers every other week. So every 2 weeks we have a coordination meeting on all prospects, both for health and for the campus. But what we do on the dean side is I meet with them too. And we send out dashboards from Salesforce and we look at the metrics. And so they are very engaged in advancement. The gift officers engage with the faculty. So I tend not to as much. I'm a little bit more administration and deans, but our gift officers within the schools have a very robust system to engage the faculty. So it's been very much a team effort across the campus.
Yeah, and that's what I was really trying to draw out. It isn't just about the chancellor or the vice chancellor and the board in an academic institution, especially one with a medical center or health operation. It's so much bigger, so much broader, and there's so many layers that have to be um, figured out in terms of engagement with those as prospective fundraisers, part of the team, and I guess even just carrying portfolios and doing that to basic blocking and tackling of fundraising that's so hard to do.
It
You
is.
you really have an amazing army of fundraisers there at the university, and that's one of the reasons why you can even contemplate goals in the billions. So it's great. Um, Many people talk about fundraising as both art and science. Wanted to know if you had any unique kind of lens on how you see fundraising as both art and science.
So we've talked a little bit about the science. I think it's the systems. So the science of it is to make sure you have a very strong database, contact manager. I'm not trying to push them, but I found Salesforce to be among the strongest products out there right now to do that. And so I stay in very close contact with them about what's the newest things. How do you embed AI into this? How do you make us more efficient in terms of prospect research and development? So I think that's the science of it. And I mentioned the Grateful Patient program. It's very very data and scientifically driven to really limit the number of extra contacts that gift officers are making if they're just sort of
Right.
going out there and just trying to meet patients or round or anything like that. We don't really do that. It's very targeted,
Yeah.
and each of those gift officers gets a list of who we've identified as a very good prospect. It's still a lot of names. It's a big system,
Yep.
but that allows us to really apply the science to it. But then, of course, as we know, if your gift officers and all of us in this job don't apply sort of the art of relationships and conversation and understanding how do you use that information ethically and rightfully to identify prospects and to treat those prospects with respect and those donors with respect for what they've gone through, what their interests are, not trying to force something. And I think that's the art of what we do. And I think it's what I look for in gift officers. I can train people on the science. I can't train them on the skills of how to be a good person and a good relationship person and to understand the real, I think, sort of the morality of what we do. It's a, it's this, as we've seen, unfortunately, in our industry, every so often we get somebody who's not doing it ethically,
Right.
and so to me that's a really big part of who's on the team. That these are really people I like and enjoy working with and are good people.
Yeah, and have extraordinarily high ethical behaviors. It's remarkable to me how many fundraisers just really operate at such a high ethical level. And part of that is, sort of the governance of the fundraising associations that we belong to and all of that stuff. But
Yes.
it's it's nice to know that there's a high standard of that in the nonprofit space. Um, and I do know that over the course of those 8 years or whatever it was for the $2 billion campaign, that it wasn't a straight line, that there were challenges, there might have even been crises involved. We talked about COVID and of course that's the X factor in so many stories that people will tell, but for some it's also been one of the better opportunities that was presented to them in terms of fundraising and engagement, though it might not have been in person for a while. But I just wanted to know from you, kind of looking back, what were challenges or crises or moments that really pivoted, where you had to pivot, or that forced you to do things a different way that maybe even helped you along in your journey?
So there was one thing that to me just struck me as interesting and something I hadn't really seen in my career yet. So so our year runs July 1 to June 30, as many educational institutions do. So 1 year in, so the calendar year in, we were coming into January, so almost half of the fiscal year, and we were pretty far behind. This was sort of into COVID. Things were starting to return, but we weren't quite there yet. And so I was getting nervous. Like I was having calls with my team saying, I don't know what's happening here, but the gift flow has almost stopped. We are way below goal, almost 6 months into the year. And we really doubled down and just looked at all the analysis and what's going on. And, our messages not resonating or, what's happening.
Yeah.
And then we went into January, which is typically a pretty slow month, and we raised like $60 million. I mean, it was the craziest, like everything closed that we were working on. So it always reminds us we're not in control of a donor's timeline. And even if we think, the calendar year end is when everybody's going to want to give for tax reasons or whatever other motivations there might be, we don't control that. And so it was just a good lesson for me and also a success story because we had just an unbelievable month after a pretty slow year and caught up in, 30 days of where we needed to be. But it just a good reminder. And we talked about COVID and everybody kind of went through that, but it was certainly interesting that we had just launched into this public phase. And so we were able to do the campaign without all of those things you would normally do in that first year of a public phase of the campaign. we basically didn't do international or out-of-state travel.
Mhm.
For all of those sort of pivotal months, I would have been doing that. And yet we still were successful. And I know we are all very grateful of the outpouring of public support during COVID to all of our organizations.
Right.
It was incredible to see, the public really continue to give and to give at high levels. So it didn't seem to, it was a challenge, and we had to think differently about what we were doing. But I saw us and many other organizations be very successful during that very difficult time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the story that I hear repeated so often. It was an extraordinarily difficult time, and obviously shook the world to its core with so many deaths. But at the same time, it was a unique time of connection for so many, of extreme philanthropy, and a strengthening of a lot of institutions that were teetering even before COVID. So it's a strange story and strange time.
Yes.
Well, let's, like, as we wind down, kind of be forward thinking a little bit here. Um, you've completed this extraordinary feat. It's the second kind of eight figure, no, 10 figure, 10, what is it? 10 figures? 10 figure campaign. Is that right? So
Yes.
seven, eight, nine, 10 figure, your second 10 figure campaign that you've completed at UCI. Don't tell me it's going to be an 11 figure next time, or is it going to be 4 billion, or like, what's next for you? What's next for UCI?
So I think there's an interesting conversation that's starting to happen at our institutions across the nation right now, which is to say, okay, now that so many of us are doing these multi-billion-dollar campaigns and completing them, do you just keep making them, like if we do the sort of the double math, right? Four, maybe five. But is there a point for our constituents where the number's just so big
Right.
that people think, why do I even participate? I can't even make a dent in that number.
Mm.
And so I think there's a real thought, and I'm having this thought about our future of, do you sort of refocus your sort of internally in campaign, and again, it's just a tool, uh, to sort of think about timing of how we do things and the systems that we use. Um, but do you think about focusing on specific areas, and rather than announcing some giant big goal, uh, do you think about some smaller goals and you just hit all of those that equal
Right.
that really, really big number? And so I'm wrestling with that right now. I think that I'm worried about that the numbers are just astronomically high.
Yeah.
And I want people at every single level to feel like their gift makes an impact. And we can do that through stewardship and the reports and making sure that our systems respond appropriately to that. But I also realize that likely the trend is going to be that
Mhm.
we're going to be raising more and more dollars each year, we hope. Even at a time that right now, higher education in particular is under the microscope, and public, opinion polls right now are not really in our favor. They're showing somewhat of a distrust in some other issues with higher education and where we've come. And so, there's that probably that we need to deal with in the next year or two or three, uh, where we sort of reframe that conversation. And I'm not speaking just politically, although that's a part of it too, but there's a lot of things that were already happening even before some of the political things that are happening now. And so I think there's a need to really think differently about how we do these campaigns. How is that message received by our communities? And so, my plan right now is to sort of refocus on the things that really impact our students and our researchers. And so, thinking more about scholarships and fellowships,
Mhm.
and sort of having that message out there in that case, why that is so important to provide access and affordability. And then under research, given all the things that are happening right now, budget cuts within most states, federal cuts potentially in grants. This research is so, so important. that there needs to be a kind of a natural shift, I think, to more private philanthropy to fund research. And that may mean really rethinking the models we've used. Is an academic chair still the model, to keep a researcher in place and to give them that extra support? Or is it a different model where we think about um, funds that can be used for a specific type of research that may fund multiple PIs or whatever that is. We're thinking about that. So it's a great question. I'm thinking a lot about the future, and but right now where I am is I'm thinking about since we didn't have a break in the last campaign, taking about 36 months now to sort of regroup and really think about where we go from here. What does that next comprehensive campaign look like? Again,
Right.
is it a big number? Is it a number of key priorities, scholarships, research, faculty support, health support for our health operation? Um, and those also have the benefit of somewhat being budget relieving. When you're in an environment where budgets are being cut, do you start to shy away from capital a little bit, capital projects, because they won't be happening as much on most of our campuses as they were before. So that's my sort of my current thinking about the future. But I do think our industry has a big challenge ahead of us. I
Yeah.
think, especially in higher education.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be watching you because you and UCI have become leaders in the space and a bellwether and all of that. And thank goodness we have organizations and leaders like you to look to figure out for so many others what the right path can be, should be. Um, because it's a scary sort of proposition to think about not doing campaigns because the appetite is not the same as it was before for chasing some of these big numbers. So we will be watching. The last question, and then we'll wrap, is advice. There are a number of fundraising professionals out there who dream of leading a campaign of this scale and magnitude, and wonder what advice you would give them as they dream of leading sort of an effort like this one day.
It probably sounds like too simple of advice, but my feeling was every position I went into to just work as hard as I possibly could to do something I care about, to make sure I was really passionate about it, and be able to express that passion to donors. And if you really talk to donors and prospects and you believe what you're saying, hopefully we all do, and you really have their interest at heart, not just the organization, but how can we find that perfect balance of what they're trying to support and something that we're doing, you're going to be successful and you're going to move up, because that is the sort of the key to what we do. And as I mentioned, I've been very blessed in my career and I've had these great opportunities to continue to move up. But as I think back at that, I really think about it as being because of that sort of ethic of, let's do this the right way. Let's be passionate about what we do and work as hard as we can at it every day. Uh, I measure my contacts in days, not what did I do for the month. I want to make sure every morning when I get up, I'm excited, and I am, to get to work and to get going and to talk to as many people and share the good message as I can.
Amazing. Well, it's great advice, Brian. And we're so lucky to have had this opportunity to chat with you. The audience is going to be unpacking what they've learned for many days, because there's just a depth and richness to what you've offered in terms of your expertise and wisdom. So thank you. Thank you for being a major force for good in our community and for the world. And unfortunately, the conversation does have to end, but I know everyone's enjoyed it and would encourage everyone, if you like this content, please follow us. Please subscribe to Mastering Fundraising, and also check out our other podcasts as well, Lead for Good, and also the Nonprofit Edge. So again, Brian, thank you for your time, and to all of those folks out there, we're wishing you all the best and look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you for joining this episode of Mastering Fundraising. We hope the conversation was helpful and invite you to like and subscribe to this podcast for more conversations with extraordinary nonprofit and fundraising leaders. To learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership, please visit us on the web at fulcrumleader.com. To learn more about the 5-Tool Fundraiser, please visit us at 5toolfundraiser.com. We want to hear from you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us at hello@fulcrumleader.com. Thank you for the important work you do to make our world stronger. We look forward to welcoming you back during a future podcast. In the meantime, take care and be well.